Hey guys, welcome to your Unit 9 wrap-up, the Civil Rights. This is a long one, so let's just go ahead and dive in and power through. Alright, so era summary. What is the Civil Rights era about? Well, it's about creating social and political change for oppressed, marginalized groups. And this is focusing primarily on African Americans, women, Hispanics, and Native Americans. And these groups are seeking their civil rights, their equality in the United States. We are going to see several civil rights groups and leaders who are going to campaign and protest and lobby for the passage of significant legislation, including the Civil Rights Acts and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and along with Supreme Court rulings such as Brown versus the Board of Education. So there is a lot to unpack here. So please make sure you are paying attention, rewind and re-listen to the topics that you might be struggling with, and let's review the Civil Rights Movement. Alright, so what are civil rights? Well, they are the legal and political rights enjoyed by the people of a country. And in the United States, those rights of the citizens and resident immigrants are protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Unfortunately, in American history, though, those rights have been denied for several groups, including African Americans, American Indians, and women. And so the Civil Rights Movement is all about making sure those rights are no longer denied and that all of these groups have their equal civil rights. All right, so when does the Civil Rights Movement start? When we think of civil rights, we tend to think of civil rights occurring in the 1960s, but they actually go all the way back to the 1860s. So following the end of the Civil War in 1865, we will see the start of the Civil Rights Movement. And the first three key pieces of legislation that are going to come out of this movement are the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So the 13th Amendment is going to abolish slavery. It is going to completely end slavery in the United States as well as make it illegal. Then you have the 14th Amendment that is going to declare all persons born in the United States, except at the time American Indians. Today American Indians are included. So all people born in the United States are citizens, and that as citizens they are entitled to equal rights regardless of their race. And their rights are protected by due process of the law. So if you were born in the United States, no matter your race, you have equal rights and those rights are protected. And then we have the 15th Amendment, which is going to grant African American men the right to vote. All right, and unfortunately, 40 years after the end of the Civil War, the African American movement is going to suffer a massive blow to their fight for equal rights with the Supreme Court case Plessy versus Ferguson. And in this Supreme Court case, the courts found that states and local municipalities, towns, can segregate people based off of their race as long as they provide separate but equal facilities. So this is going to basically divide bathrooms, theaters, railroad cars, entrances into restaurants, schools. All of these facilities are going to be divided by race. So you will have a whites only facility, and then you would have a facility for any of the other races. And this is going to be a huge blow to the African Americans' fight for civil rights. And then another blow to the fight for civil rights are going to be the Jim Crow laws. So after Reconstruction, states in the South are going to pass laws that are going to enforce segregation And they're going to restrict those who can vote. So these Jim Crow laws will make it to where you can only vote if you own property, or if you pay a poll tax, or if you take a literacy test proving that you are able to read as a condition to vote. And because of this, the point of what they're doing is they're trying to limit who can vote. They're trying to keep African Americans from being able to vote. And these laws are going to be enforced by government officials, and then as well through intimidation tactics by groups such as the KKK. It won't be until 1948 that the African American community gets a massive victory in their fight for civil rights and equality. So in 1948, following World War II, President Harry Truman is going to end segregation of the armed forces. This means the military will be desegregated, and it does not matter your race. You will be treated equally, and units will be integrated with multiple races. So the end of segregation in the military occurred in 1948 by President Harry Truman. All right, and then in 1950, we get Sweatt versus Panther, and this happened right here in Texas. So this is kind of an important case for us here in Texas. So a young African-American man, it's right here, is going to be refused admission into the University of Texas Law School. So that young man is Sweatt, and Sweatt's going to sue, and he's going to say, you aren't offering me an alternative. You know, you have to offer separate but equal. And so Texas is going to quickly try to throw together a separate law school in Houston. If I remember correctly, it's going to have like 3 classrooms and like a couple teachers. It is absolutely not equal at all in any sense of the term. So the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, the Supreme Court is going to rule that this is not separate but equal, and that Sweatt must be admitted into the University of Texas Law School under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So what they're saying is that the separation or the segregation of the University of Texas Law School is not equal, and because of that, Sweatt had to be admitted into the University of Texas Law School. All right, and then in 1954, we get a big case for Hispanics here in Texas with Hernandez versus Texas. So SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, is going to rule that Mexican Americans were a special class in the United States, and therefore they have equal protection guaranteed under the 14th Amendment. And so the systematic exclusion of Mexican Americans from juries in Texas was a violation of the Constitution. And from that point on, the Mexican American community were identified as their own special class, and they had to be included in all future juries. Then we get the big Supreme Court case of them all. Guys, this is going to be on your STAR test, okay? Brown versus Board of Education. This is one of the biggest cases ever. So it is going to be argued and won by Thurgood Marshall, who will become the first African American to be put on the Supreme Court later. But at this point, he's still an attorney, and he is going to argue this case, and he is going to win it. And what the Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, says is that racially segregated schools are inherently unequal. And because of this, segregation will be banned in schools, and schools are going to be forced to integrate. So no more dividing up by race. All races will come together in the same schools. So desegregation is the key. Brown versus the Board of Education overturns Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. Okay, is going to overturn it. We are going to get rid of separate but equal, and we are going to ban segregation. All right, and this is a problem to people in the South. They are not fans of this. And so we have a group called the Southern Bloc, and they're led by George Wallace and somewhat by Orville Faubus. But George Wallace, he's the guy pictured on the left. He's the governor of Alabama. He's a pro-segregationist. He wants to keep races separately. Or he wants to keep races separate. And he said in his inaugural address as governor, I say segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. He wanted to ensure races were kept divided. Then you have Orville Faubus, who's pictured here in the middle, and he was the governor of Arkansas, and we're going to talk about him a little bit more in a second. But ultimately, he's going to send in troops to try to block African American students from entering his schools. And so, like I said, these two were part of the congressional bloc of Southern Democrats. And so this was a group of 18 Southern Democrats and one Republican in the South. And they worked to try to prevent civil rights from being passed and approved. So they would rely on filibusters, which is basically standing up and talking before the House or the Senate for so long that the bill just finally got delayed. So Southern Bloc, not happy with integration and the forced end of segregation. They are pro-segregation, and they are going to try to fight to prevent desegregation from happening. All right, so the Little Rock Nine. These were 9 African American students who are going to enroll in Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And Governor Orville Faubus, who I said was part of the Southern Bloc, is going to try to block their entrance to this school. He is going to order the Arkansas National Guard to prevent them from entering. So the National Guard is going to stand out in front of the school, and they're only going to allow white students. Well, this does not sit well with the federal government, because Brown versus the Board of Education has said schools must be integrated. So President Eisenhower is going to be influenced by his spiritual advisor, a Christian minister named Billy Graham. And Billy Graham is going to convince President Eisenhower, you have to help these kids at all costs. And so what does Eisenhower do? He's going to send in 1,000 federal troops to ensure that these 9 students are allowed to integrate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. All right, during the same time period, we have freedom rides. So the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, ruled that interstate transportation could not be segregated. So if you were riding a bus from one state to the other, they were integrated. The buses were integrated. There wasn't African Americans having to ride on a different bus. So buses could be integrated, and people didn't like this. So in a form of protest, we found groups of people who were riding the buses from one state to the other, specifically in the South, protesting and making sure that, segregation was being stopped. All right, we also had counter sit-ins. So a sit-in is a nonviolent protest when one or more people occupy an area, often to promote political, social, or economic change. So protesters usually would go into these restaurants. They would seat themselves, and then they would stay there until they either were forcefully removed or until their requests had been met. A lot of times, this forceful removal of these protesters would lead to sympathy in their case, because people were absolutely devastated by their treatment and they were very upset. And so, the civil rights movement used this to their advantage, because people, look at this image on the right. This is devastating. And so this led to a lot of public support for the African Americans civil rights movement. All right, in 1964, this is going to be a huge victory for the African American movement for civil rights. President Lyndon B. Johnson is going to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And this is going to end racial, religious, and sexual discrimination in the workplace by employers. It became illegal for an employer, a company, a boss, to either refuse to hire someone or fire someone based off of their race, their religion, their sex, their origin, or anything like that. So they could not say, oh, I didn't hire you because you're African American. That became illegal. Okay, so this is going to open up the opportunities for employment to minority groups. And this wasn't just African Americans. Like, they're the ones who helped push it. And if you see in this image on the left, behind Lyndon B. Johnson is Martin Luther King. But this is going to benefit all races, all genders, all religions. And then in 1965, we have the Voting Rights Act, which is going to ensure the rights granted in the 15th Amendment, but it's also going to spread to everyone. So basically, if you're born an American citizen or you have become an American citizen through the immigration process, you have the right to vote. And it is going to make poll taxes and literacy tests illegal. And this is going to lead to an increase in the number of minorities registering to vote and the number of minorities participating in the democratic process. All right, Miranda versus Arizona, 1966. So if you're ever watching a movie or a TV show and somebody gets arrested and they start reading them, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law and all that. That is called the Miranda right. And this is the man who it's named after. So the Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, determined that Miranda's Fifth Amendment right had been violated because he had not been given all the information necessary when he confessed to his crimes. So the court decided that a defendant must be told that they have a right to an attorney, and one would be appointed if they could not afford one. And then evidence from an interrogation cannot be used against a defendant unless the prosecution can demonstrate that these rights were given and knowingly waived. So this was a big. All right, the Great Society. This is going to be Lyndon B. Johnson's war on poverty. He is going to try to fight to eliminate poverty, expand health care, and fight racial injustice. And some of his programs are going to be the Food Stamp Act, which is now called SNAP, the Housing and Urban Development, which is low-income housing, Child Nutrition Act, Head Start education programs, Medicaid, which is health care, financial assistance for health care, basically, for those of low-income families. Medicare, which is going to be health care, health insurance for those over the age of 65, Job Corps, and then, like we talked about, my personal favorite, PBS, the Public Broadcasting Service, because, you got to have Reading Rainbow. That show was legit. So the Great Society is going to be Johnson's war on poverty. And then during this time, we're going to see the Act of Affirmative Action. And this is designed to increase the representation of women and minorities in the job force and in education. Up until this point, they had been historically excluded. It was a white man's world. And affirmative action is going to assist minorities and women in getting jobs that might have otherwise not been available to them. All right, Title IX. So this is big in the college level, and it's specifically known mostly around college sports. However, what it does is it ensures that whatever programs are available to men in educational institutions are also available to women. So men and women in terms of education are equal. So if a college offers something for a man, then they must make sure that they offer it for a woman. All right, Yoder versus Wisconsin in 1972. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, decides that Amish children did not have to be placed in public school past the 8th grade because it violated a parent's rights to freedom of religion. So this goes back to our First Amendment, right? Your freedom of religion, your choice of religion. That's your personal decision. The government has no say in it. And so schools could not force Amish children to go to school after the 8th grade as it violated their religious rights. All right, African American political organizations. So we had the NAACP, which was started by W.E.B. Du Bois, or, if we've referred to him, Du Bois. He started the NAACP. We have the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was started by Martin Luther King. We have the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and then the Congress on Racial Equality. Both the SNCC and CORE, they were vital in the sit-ins and the freedom rides during the 1960s. The NAACP, by the way, is still super, super active today. All right, and then you have the face of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King. So he is going to be the leader of the civil rights movement. He is the founder of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and he is going to preach an approach of nonviolent civil disobedience. And he demanded equal rights for African Americans, and he wanted desegregation in the public sphere. So he wanted desegregation across the board, and he chose a nonviolent civil disobedience method to get there. So what is civil disobedience? So as a reminder, you are not allowed to wear slides to school, but those of you who still choose to wear slides, that is an act of civil disobedience. And unfortunately, Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee by a white man named James Earl Ray. All right, so power of words. So we have two documents that we looked at in class that are incredibly important to Dr. King's message of nonviolent civil disobedience and his desire and dream for equality for everyone. So first was his I Have a Dream speech, which was delivered in this picture here on the right at the Capitol, and he's going to deliver this speech at the March on Washington. And so the March on Washington is thousands of civil rights protesters, African Americans, anybody who wants civil rights equality, marched on Washington demanding change. And he's going to play on the words of our founding fathers. All men are created equal. And then he had his letter from Birmingham jail. And this is where he gives the civil disobedience talk. And he says, there are two types of laws, those that are just and those that are unjust. So those that are fair and those that are not fair. And one has a moral responsibility to disobey the unjust laws. So this is things like Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus in Montgomery. That law was unjust. So therefore, she had a moral responsibility to not follow that law. All right, so we also had Malcolm X, who was another civil rights leader during the time. However, he's going to take a very different approach than Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was all about nonviolence. Malcolm X is going to be by any means necessary, and he was not opposed to using armed resistance or violence if needed. He was also one of the founders of the Black Panther Party, which was a militant group which argued that armed resistance may be needed to get their equality and to get their civil rights. So I want you to remember that when you think of Malcolm X, you think of the Black Panther Party. And when you think of the Black Panther Party, you think Malcolm X. They are one and the same, okay? All right, Rosa Parks. Y'all all did fantastic with knowing who she was. So she was an African-American civil rights activist. And in Montgomery, Alabama, she was arrested for refusing to give up her seat on a city bus for a white man, which led to her arrest. And once she was arrested, the African Americans of Montgomery, Alabama are going to be furious over this. And so they're going to do what is called the Montgomery bus boycott. And they are going to refuse to use the Montgomery bus service. Well, when you use public transportation, you have to pay to use it. So if the entire African American population of Montgomery, Alabama says we are not using it anymore, this is going to be a financial loss for the bus company. And so this was a huge way for the civil rights movement to get their rights and to get equality. So they went after the pocketbook. And when you start messing with people's money, that's when you start getting change. All right, next we have Betty Friedan. Betty Friedan was a journalist, and she wrote the book, The Feminine Mystique, which detailed the concerns of American housewives, and it restarted the women's movement. It had kind of gone dormant after the 19th Amendment, but Betty Friedan's going to re-inspire this movement. And she is going to be the founder of the organization NOW, the National Organization of Women. And they are going to seek out equal employment opportunities, equal pay, the legalization of abortions, and a constitutional amendment seeking women's equal rights. Eleanor Roosevelt. She was the former First Lady. She was married to Franklin D. Roosevelt. And she was a humanitarian. She was fighting hard for equal rights for all humans. And so she's going to be appointed by President Harry Truman as a delegate to the United Nations to serve on their Commission of Human Rights. So she is a huge fighter for equal rights for African Americans and for women as well. All right, Shirley Chisolm. She is the first African-American woman to be elected to the House of Representatives. And this was a big victory. So this occurred in 1972. And this is, or 1969, I'm sorry. She was going to run for president in 1972. But in 1969, she was elected to the House of Representatives. And this is big because this shows that the civil rights movement is working. Because not only is a woman elected to the House of Representatives, but it's an African American woman. And so this was the first sign that, hey, these efforts are really starting to come together, that African Americans are starting to find equality in the United States. All right, and then Sandra Day O'Connor in 1981 will be the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States. So she will become the first female on SCOTUS. She was nominated by Ronald Reagan in 1981. The American Indian Movement, or AIM, was centered specifically around the fight for civil rights for Native Americans, and they are going to be fighting to end poverty amongst their community, as well as ending police brutality. The Chicano Movements. So we have three groups specifically. We have LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. We have the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, or just United Farm Workers, UFW. And then La Raza Unida. So these are going to be the groups that are fighting for Chicano rights. The Chicano Mural Movement. This is going to begin in the 60s in the barrios of the Southwest. So basically think Texas to Southern California. And artists are going to begin using walls to visually depict their culture, their heritage, and their pride in their culture, and to educate the community about who Chicanos were, what their culture was, what their history was, what they stood for, what they represented. So they use these murals as a way to educate the public and to express their heritage. Cesar Chavez. He is going to be the leader of the Chicano movement, primarily of the United Farm Workers. So he is going to fight for migrant workers' rights, along with Dolores Huerta. So they are going to fight to get rights for workers, and he is going to use nonviolent tactics, very similar to Martin Luther King, such as boycotts. And as I said, he was joined by Dolores Huerta, who was an advocate and a lobbyist for farm workers' rights, and worked to get rights, civil rights for immigrants, migrant workers, and women. All right, the Beat Generation. So these are the beatniks. These are the OG hipsters. So this was a literary movement, and it was started by authors who are wanting to explore and influence post-war America. And so their work is going to be centralized around rejecting standard traditional values. And they're making a spiritual journey. They want to find, what is the meaning? Why are we here? How can we make things better? So they're looking for something deeper. And they are going to reject economic materialism. And they're going to try to portray what the human condition is like. So what is life really like for people? It's not what we see on television. Here is what you really see when you look at life in America. And then we have the counterculture movement. So this is another form of rebellion against traditional standard values. So remember, the Beat Generation and the counterculture hippies are both rejecting 1950s America. And so what the hippies are going to be doing is they want to remove themselves from this traditional way of life, and they want to basically explore, how do I want to say it? They want to explore a society that's not built on trying to keep up with the Joneses and trying to have as much money as possible, but that's built on love and respect. And so they believe, let's just throw everything that we know away, and let's grow our hair out long. Let's wear tie-dye. Let's be colorful, because we are all about love and sharing experiences and having experiences, and get rid of hate, get rid of war, and let's just do a community where we help our neighbor and we rely on each other. And the hippie movement, counterculture movement, is going to culminate at Woodstock in August 1969, where hundreds of thousands of people are going to attend this festival in northern New York, and police are going to avoid any confrontation. They are going to choose to not enforce drug laws, and the festival is actually extremely peaceful despite its massive size. And over here we have Jimi Hendrix, who is going to play his legendary version of the Star Spangled Banner. And this is going to kind of end out the whole counterculture hippie movement. All right, so what we are going to see throughout the 1960s and throughout the civil rights movement, so from the 50s into the 60s, is an increase in participation in the democratic process. So we're going to see an increase of lobbying, people trying to convince lawmakers to vote for change. We're going to see an increase in nonviolent protesting as pushed by Martin Luther King. We're going to see Supreme Court decisions. We're going to see litigation. We're going to see people going to court to get their civil rights. But the biggest thing that's going to come out of this is that minorities, so this is African Americans, women, Hispanics, Native Americans, anybody who has been oppressed, these minorities are going to use their new freedom to vote, and they're going to vote to promote economic and political opportunity and to expand civil rights for all Americans. So this is big. And we're going to see the expansion of voter rights. So the 19th Amendment, which was passed in 1920, is going to give women their right to vote. Then we're going to have the 24th Amendment, which is going to eliminate the poll tax. The 26th Amendment is going to lower the age to vote from 21 to 18. And then the American Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 granted citizenship to all American Indians born in the United States. And the political impact of the civil rights movement. This is going to increase voter registration and participation. So we are going to see the amount of people registering to vote go up and the amount of people actually voting go up. And then we're going to see an increase in the number of minorities running for office, and then not only running for office, but getting elected to office. And so what does that impact today? Well, in 2008, Barack Obama was elected the first African American president of the United States of America. In 2009, he appointed Sonia Sotomayor to the Supreme Court, and she was the first Hispanic female placed on the Supreme Court. We are going to see in 2015 the elimination of restrictions on women serving in combat. So that means women can now serve on the front lines in the military. In 2015, the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, will legalize gay marriage. In 2016, Hillary Clinton will be the first woman nominated as a candidate for the presidency by a major political party. And in 2020, we have the election of Kamala Harris to the office of vice president. And then I also included Naomi Osaka on here because she is the future of women and minority women in sports. So I wanted to include her because she is the future of the continuing fight for minorities and for women in the realm of sports. All right, so your test. You need to ensure that you are reading with thought. What do I know about this topic? What is this question asking me? And you need to do your strategies. Each time Harry sings excites us. Every question on this test, your era is going to be the civil rights. What is your topic? Is it economic, social, political, or environmental? Highlight your keywords. Write your summary. X out any wrong answers and underline your evidence. Guys, do your strategies. They work. You know they work. I know they work. We all know they work. It is up to you to do the strategies, okay? Read with thought, read carefully, read, 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 and do your strategies, and you will do amazing. I hope this helps, and best of luck on your test. Bye, guys.